Yo, what's up guys? A video on a tier list on 4 stars. Definitely you have been getting the question quite a bunch like, hey, I got a whole bunch of 4 stars. Should I feed them in for skill up? Should I feed them in for maybe the L&D scrolls or the legendary scrolls or maybe even the conversion stones? Well, to be honest, conversion stones, we never do it on the 4 stars. Just not worth it. But for the other things, for the legendary scrolls and LD scrolls, it's definitely worth it if you're pulling enough units. But mainly skill ups. Skill ups is the main thing. But then the question is, what should you build? I did already kind of make this video and then I messed up the whole audio of both this one and the LD version. LD version is the one of tomorrow. So I have to redo the whole thing, but I also wasn't too happy with my tier list because a lot of the units are kind of like niche comparing one to another if you put them like the triple S, double S, or the 195, blah, blah, that kind of stuff. So I actually pretty much named the tier lists right here. So it's going to be OP and build multiple, OP but only build one, strong in specific content, decent units to build, often replaced by net 5, so you could think about things that are good for TOA but also easy to replace. And then we also have decent, or then we have not commonly used, but I think have potential, so kind of like the low-key units that might be good. Not commonly used, probably just feed, so the kind of things that are not just straight up feed, but could be used here and there. And then we have just straight up feed. And feed then, of course, means you check if one of the higher ups need like the skill ups, or you just feed them for less scrolls, or like LD scrolls, or something like that. That's going to be the whole gist of this video. I want to keep it short and simple. I'm going to be placing all of the units by oldest released unit to newest released unit. I do think I have everything in here. If you want to check where a unit is placed or where I would use it, just check out like, and then see which unit is being placed and then what comes out later or after, or that kind of stuff. Or someone, if you want to be that friendly and write all of the timestamps in the thumbnail by family, will be very cool as well. So let's get going with that. I will mention where I would use them and some cases also how I would build them. But I think the how to build does take a lot of time. So let's just get going with a Soha. I think it's not commonly used, but it has potential. It has the skill 3 right now, but is somewhat similar to a Tiana where you strip and then you boost the whole team. So I definitely do think it has some potentials in AoE strip or high accuracy, that kind of style. Shihua is one of those things that is strong in specific content. It's strong in Siege. It is strong in the R5. And for R5, it's mainly the dot team where you go the double 5 plus a will set and then just some damage on it. In Siege, I would say it's mainly like a speed, HP, tanky one, high accuracy, high additional damage artifacts. Wouldn't say she's necessarily OP at the moment because she's not really fitting in the meta that well for 4-star Siege, but she's definitely pretty strong for Siege and for R5. Arang, I would say that it's just for R5 and you don't use it anywhere else. You could actually use this in the Rift dungeon as well of water. You could use it in early game R5 or in early game Giants team as well, but that's pretty easy to replace. But I would say strong in specific content, and for that reason, it's just up there. So I would also say that for these two, you probably want to skill them up. For the Soha, probably you don't have to skill them up. Arang is also a little bit less interesting to skill up. Shihua, if you use, especially in Siege, I would skill her up. This one wouldn't skill up. This one, you could skill up. Moving on next, this one is the Reviver unit. I don't think people really use it. I would just say straight up feed. Same for this thing, like people don't really tend to use this. They did recently get a buff, but I still haven't seen anyone use them, so I don't really see the potential of those. However, we have a Delphoy. I would say Delphoy is, I would say build 1. You could, if you care about Siege, it's currently not that bad in Siege content as well. You could build multiple, but it's definitely also good if you want to go for a arena offense team with a Galleon, Delphoy, Leo, Christina, something like that. It's definitely strong in those Leo kind of combinations because she does have the cleanse, she does have the Oblivion, so it's definitely a strong unit for that. 4-star RTA maybe, but it's mainly the PvP things, but I would definitely build one of the Delphoys. It's always good to have. Maybe it's just strong in specific content, but I think she's actually pretty legit to have in there. You could, if you care about Siege, build multiple as well. You just want to go high accuracy, high resistance, high tankiness, and all of that kind of good stuff. Then we go Tyrone, strong in TOA, strong in your first Dragons team if you want to use it there. Strong in if you want to use it in Special League. And you could use it in earlier-ish game in Siege as well. If you go like this thing plus like a bunch of AoE strips, it's definitely not an early game or like a bad early game Siege kind of comp. So you want to go High in speed, high accuracy, additional damage artifacts most likely. Definitely a very strong unit to build fast. Then we have Beretta, which I would say is a decent unit, but also easily replaced by a net 5. But the reason I say it's a decent unit, it's a good unit for TOA, but we also have the common dot team right now in Arena Offense, which I've been showcasing a whole bunch of times. You can actually replace a Rika with a Beretta, or you can replace the Nora. Well, Nora is like a little bit of the healing, but mainly the Rika slot is kind of replaceable by a Beretta. It definitely does have an option to be placed in there. Plus, it does damage enemy max HP on the S2 right now, which is pretty good also for TOA stuff. Plus, it has no glancing on the S3. So, for that reason, this thing is pretty good for all of that. Then we have Shimate. Shimate is insanely good for Arena Offense. It's probably the highest damage dealer out there with a speed lead. It's just 24 lead, but it is definitely very good. If you go free to play full route, then this is absolutely the best damage dealer you can find in Arena Offense, pretty much. So definitely recommend to build one. You just want to go very high damage on speed, crit rate, crit damage, and attack, and that's probably the way to go. I would also definitely skill up all of these. Like, I would say everything that's probably above this is probably worth to skill up. Well, next off, we have a Lumericia. I think people don't really use this all too much, but you could maybe use it. I see some potential in it. This thing, it's also, it's just the R5 thing where you revive the units, so that's not commonly used, but I place it over here. It's not really commonly used, but you kind of can use it for R5 for like the reviving thing. It's not that crazy. Arcase is actually not that bad if you want to place it towards TOA Hell, but it's only good for TOA Hell. Like, maybe you can place it in here for specific content, but I think that you can also do that just with the Wusa or something like that. So Arcase is for TOA Hell, where you have the stage of Reflect 3000 or enemy with high crit damage, then she becomes pretty interesting. Then we have Sion. I would say Sion is actually pretty nice. And the reason I say Sion is pretty nice, I think it's one of the better bombers in the game. Plus, it is just good for... It's still decent to have as a late pick in RTA. It's not crazy good anymore, but it's still decent to have. Not as good anymore because of Oliver's and then Chungpong, Cigars, all of those reset units. It's pretty terrible in that, but as a 5th pick can still be a must ban. Plus, I would say that it's one of the better bombers in Siege, and I think that if you want to go full free-to-play bombing round, it's probably your best bomber as well. Oh, then we have Jojo. I think Jojo is not commonly used, but I do think he has potential because he actually has a strip on his skill 3 as well. So, let's say you're using a double bomber team, having Jojo as your first bomber that can also strip if your stripper actually missed could be something that you could use. However, the base stats on Jojo of attack are just horrendously bad. So for that reason, it's not commonly used for that reason. It can have some potential, but it's not really commonly used. Lucian, I don't think I have to explain too much about. It's just used in pretty much all kinds of contents. PvE, PvP, high-end, low-end. RTA not as much, maybe early game RTA a little bit more, but high-end RTA not as much. But this thing is just all over the place, and therefore Lucian is one of those OP and build multiple. Then we have Isaria. I would say it's just used for RTA at the position of Special League. It is not too bad for that, but I don't really think it's that great, but can have some potential. I would say the same for Akia. It's not really commonly used, but for 4-star RTA can be used. It's not really that great. This thing, I've never seen anyone use that, so that's one is straight up feed for me. Then we have Susano, which I think has some potential, but is often replaced by a net 5 that would just simply do better. Well, no, actually, I would give it a little bit one up of that because it's... Or would I even give him the OP? Now, it's actually good for the team where you go like a Susano, Konomiya, Lucian kind of style in Siege. It's definitely pretty strong. I would say that it's also... well, for RTA, it's not that strong. So I think it's just Siege. I would say just like this, mainly just Siege things, and then for RTA, he kind of gets replaced. I would say for Garo, it's kind of the same thing. Strong in Siege, but nowhere else really used that much. And also for Siege, you don't really see a Garo being used all too much these days. Then I would say for Orochi, kind of the same thing. Orochi is... I would even put Orochi a little bit down below that. You can see it being used in Elunia, but I think in Elunia it's definitely easy to replace as well the moment you get like a Sonya or Dominic or something like that. And you can't really place it in Giants anymore because you just simply can't dot it, so it's not really great. Then we have Julie. I would say that Julie is OP, but do you actually need multiple Julies? You could build multiple Julies, but I think it's not as necessary. You can, like, for me personally, I just have one Julie. It's definitely one of those OP you should 100% build her. She's one of the better units. It's absolutely a build, but I wouldn't really build multiple of her unless you use her a lot in siege offense. But I think that this thing is a lot more versatile why you want to use multiple of, and Julie a little bit less, but still insanely strong unit. Clara, however, I would build multiple of because you can actually put multiple Claras on defense. You can have a Clara on Swift, you can have a Clara on Fire, you can have a Clara on Despair. It's just an insanely good unit, and this thing is used to so many good defenses. If you're full free to play or you don't happen to have the units, this is probably your best unit for potentially speed lead in arena defense and also siege defense. So everything PvP related, this thing is just insanely good for that. Julie, yeah, you're not gonna put it in defense, but yeah, okay, fine. Then we have the Sophia. I would say is a decent unit, but it also kind of gets replaced by Prilia. So it's not really commonly used that much anymore. Did recently get a buff, but I do think she has some potential in some PvE stages. The only big issue is where she doesn't have that much place in, for example, Giants. Is that in Giants, you will have the issue where she does like a 5 multi-hit on the boss and therefore pretty much already makes you counter right away. So that makes her, no, I'm actually gonna place her a little bit below that. You could use her in R5 though. Then next up we have Lure. This thing doesn't glance on skill 3. It's an armor break skill 3 with a pushback on skill 3. I would say is a decent unit if you don't really have like good armor breakers. It definitely can help in that. But it's also definitely one of those where I would say the moment you get a net 5 that's an AoE armor break, then it's definitely going to be replacing that one. But it could be nice for that specific content. This one, I would say, it's not really commonly used, can have some potential, and then it's mainly the potential. Well, I would actually say it over here. Like, it's a decent unit for mainly dealing damage in R5, but the moment you get a brand, yeah, that's better. If you want to deal damage on the Windrift Beast, it's nice, but the moment you get something like a Laika or Douglas or anything like that, it's probably better. So until then, that unit is kind of okay. This one you could use as AoE CC for TOA, but it's just pretty much that, and it's not even that crazy good at it. So not commonly used, could probably feed as well. Lisel is one of those, I would say, is currently getting more and more common in siege defense, siege offense a little bit, arena offense sometimes for an armor break as well. I would say it has quite some potential. I'm going to place it over, where would I place it? You kind of need a Dark Series to put this thing on defense. So if you don't have a Dark Series, it probably is a little bit lower. But if you do have a Dark Series, then this thing is definitely a nice combination with Dark Series, this thing, and then an Asher, or, well, I would go for Asher. I wouldn't go for Figure because then you have too much water, but those are options out there. Then we go for Vert. Vert goes straight to the top, OP and build multiple. For RTA, you can have Swift Verts, Fire Verts, Triple Revenge Verts, combination of those three somewhere in between Verts. You have Vert for PvE, you can make a Vert even still work in Siege offense, so Arena offense can technically work as well, but yeah, Vert is just insanely good. Don't really have to explain too much about him. Then we say this thing, Argon. I would say Argon is pretty nice, but also easily replaced by either a net 5 or even a 2A. It is pretty decent for your early game teams in Giants. It's pretty decent for your early game teams in even Necro. Necro, it's kind of doable too. It's a little bit worse there, but it is doable in Necro. And it's pretty good for Steel Fortress as well. So this thing definitely has a few places where he's pretty decent. Still missing out on being exceptionally good, but a bunch of PvE stuff, he's pretty good. Then we have Chloe. I would say Chloe is definitely one of those you want to build one of. Can be used as a late pick in RTA. It's not really used that much, but as a NAM trap in RTA can be used. But especially in early game sieges, I definitely do think that there's still a whole bunch of teams out there where the enemy simply has like 3 non-stripper units. You go for a Chloe, boost up the invisibility and immunity, and then you let all of the enemies move, and then you have a double bomber moving, and they just clear the whole field, for example. Or you have a Galleon plus damage dealer, like a Galleon Kaki moving or something like that. Definitely a strong one that you definitely want to build one of. It's always useful for that. Then we have Su, which is one of those damage dealers you don't really see too much. I think it can maybe have some potential. No, I don't really think she's that interesting. Like, maybe on the Rift dungeon, it's a little bit like that, but even there, I wouldn't really use it. I would say Fire Rakshasa Ahua is a little bit more interesting. Can actually be used towards, like, the Wind Rift Beast, maybe in R5. But that is about it. It's still kind of decent for that. I would say that Yen is what you see sometimes in Siege offense next to like a Raccoonian Hwadam. But I think that's the only place I've ever seen Yen. Plus, Yen is kind of nice in the Water Rift dungeon as well. So I'm going to place Yen over there. So that's a little bit of usage for those. Then we have Rigel, Siege offense from time to time if you don't want to get stunned. I've seen some people use it in RTA as well, thinking that it would solo shit. Most of the time it doesn't really, but it still has some potential, so I do think it's pretty strong for those things. And Terrace, I don't really have to explain too much about. It's just pretty good in RTA, but it's only RTA. I wouldn't really use Antares anywhere else unless you're fighting some kind of weird team in Siege offense where they take a shit ton of turns without doing anything. Then you could maybe even Antares those, but wouldn't really necessarily say that it's any great for those. So that's, yeah, I would just place Antares over there. Then we go for Fuko. I would say Fuko is good for your first teams in Steel Fortress. No, wait, not Steel Fortress. Punish the Script is an option because it does have the slow. Well, it's actually for Punish the Script, it's definitely not too bad. Early Punish the Script team. An early Necro team, it's definitely not bad. And you still use it to get the slow on the boss in R5. So it's definitely good for those specific things. Moving on next, this is the thing that goes for the Endure buff. I don't really see this commonly being used. Maybe there's some Siege offense that people use it, but I don't really see it too much. Arnold is good in specific content. That's just Siege offense. It's definitely one of those things that you want to do for a bruiser fight while being tanky. Sniping out something in Siege offense 4-star, and it's just good for that. I'd say Brienne currently is a decent reviver as well for Siege offense, and yeah, that's mainly that. So if you put a Brienne next to this with maybe a Triana or something, that's kind of those kind of comps that you see from time to time these days. It's just like super bulky comps trying to survive things and then clear things. So let's say Brienne is not that bad in current position. We go on for some Samurais. I would say Cass is the one that you see the least probably. I think he can have some potential. They can do some damage, but he's not really that great. I think that this one is the worst one, and that this one also, like, I would say that this one has the most, but no, I think that they're kind of same. Like, they do have some damage, but they're not really that crazy good or anything. So wouldn't really necessarily say that they're that great. Then we have Shaolin. I would say Shaolin is very good for your first R5 team. It is pretty decent good for Rift Raid dungeons as well, but it's mainly R5. It does have a good amount of damage. Probably one of the better damage dealers you have in, yeah, if you could just go full free-to-play, like full free-to-play or full 4-star, let's call it that way. But this unit has an insane amount of damage in R5. And a lot of people have been asking, like, okay, how can you replace Brandia? A lot of people mentioned Crow, but actually, Shaolin does do more damage than that. So it's pretty decent for that. Then we have Honghua, I think. I haven't really seen this thing being used ever, so I would just kind of feed this. There's like the provoking shit. It's really not that great. Then we have Ling Ling, which I think is good just in Steel Fortress, but I think that there's better options for Steel Fortress as well. Because to be honest, the Zinc kind of replaces her already, but until you get that one, this is pretty decent. Orion these days, I would say Siege defense in lower ranks, maybe it's still kind of used in there, but it's not really anything great anymore. People are too used to it, so it's not really that great. I would say Draco is pretty decent for boosting, and if you want to do some kind of cleave in either 4-star or something like that, but it's often like the moment you get up a stat, it's just simply better. I would say Aquila is actually quite underrated. I think that this unit is actually pretty good because it has a loaded kit where it strips. It gives the crit rate buff, and it gives the attack buff. So that's actually 3 things. That is already one more thing than, for example, a Jogun, because it's just attack buff and the strip. This thing also gives the crit buff. Sure, you have to do double skill for it, and you have to land one to actually do the other, but I think that this Aquila is probably one of the better boosters for free-to-play out there. So it's definitely a nice unit that you could pick up. Malaka is one of those bombers. I don't really like Malaka as a bomber. Could be used, but it's not really commonly used that much. Gibraltar for like the thing. No, don't really like it as well. Taurus, I think Taurus has some potential for like, if you want to go for bombers, I feel like that a Taurus as a bomber, which also has the increased cooltime, probably has more value than a Malaka. Then we go next on with a Miang. Well, Miang goes straight to the top. Build multiple, insanely strong unit. You see it in so many offices these days with Adrianas, with Chillings, speed buff, crit buff. Well, crit buff you don't really need, but speed buff, attack buff. Does an insane amount of damage in Siege. You have seen it from time to time in Arena Offense as well. You see it from time to time in RTA as well. So definitely an insanely strong unit. Plus, works on defense too. Wahe is one of those units that I would say in R5, pretty decent. But anything else than R5 and maybe the Rift Dungeons, not that great. So just more of that PvE units. It's pretty decent, but the moment you get something else with an attack buff, you probably replace it. Mainly replaced by Bastet, I guess. I would say Jasun is not really commonly used anymore, but still can have some usage if you want to go for a full win team in Siege offense or something like that. Then we have Gildong. I would say Gildong is actually strong in specific content, and that is World Boss. So I do want to mention him and actually place him high, because if you want to focus on World Boss, and I definitely do encourage early game players to say like, okay, do focus a little bit on World Boss. And I do have videos on that specifically. You can check out those if you want to. But Gildong is one of the easiest units to skill up because he is skilled up by 3-star units. Plus, he has pretty high attack, so you can do a lot of attack multipliers on him. And he will definitely perform nice in World Boss. And just simply for that, he's already worth quite some to just build like a bunch of or even multiple of. But it's strong in very specific content that's just World Boss. This thing you can use towards TOA clearing, but it's not really that great. Like TOA clearing for like pushbacks and that kind of stuff. It can be work, or it can work, but it's not really that great. Then we have Argon, which can work for some clears on Siege offense maybe, but it's not really that much of a common unit. The issue what he has is with the skill 3, it just becomes that squishy where he doesn't become that great. I would say Sutter is probably the same thing. You can use it to do the death denial effect, but it's not really that great. Crosswell, on the other hand, is OP, and I would definitely build just one. It's one of those units that you want to use towards everything PvE related that is not your specific Kairos dungeons. So what does that mean? Subjugation, insanely good. Anything Labyrinth related, insanely good. Yeah, pretty much just all of those kind of things where his attack buff and his speed buff make a lot of sense, while he can also do damage while also landing the branding. He's just a pretty loaded kit for PvE, so you definitely do want to build one Grosveld. Then we have Galleon. Well, that one is pretty simple, straight to the top, build multiple. You can use so many Galleon things with so many different things. It's just one of the best setup units out there. With Galleon, do keep in mind that you're not just focusing on the accuracy. I do always highly recommend to give Galleon a violent set, because then if you miss your skill 3 armor break, you get a violent turn, and then you can maybe land on that on the skill 2 later. Plus, you want to have decent damage on him that he can actually clear things if your damage dealer tends to die. Then we have Karak, which is kind of the same as this thing, which you can use for bombing, but I wouldn't really use those two things for bombing, so it's not that great. I would say Berkey kind of has some potential, but mainly like Rift Dungeons or something like that. It's not really that great. Tetra, I would say Tetra is definitely an OP one. Maybe even build multiple off. No, I would just build one. It's Siege offense for sure. Arena offense, when you go for like a Leo Feng Yang kind of team, it's insanely strong as well. Plus in RTA, if you're fighting those Neftis or you're fighting those Layla comps with Hey Gang or Tomoe, there's just a lot of things that Tetra's actually low-key insanely good against. So definitely build the Tetra's a super good unit. Platy, however, can be used here and there for the increased cooltime, but it's not really that great. I would say Kiklet, we're going to place that one in strong and specific content. It's not really as meta anymore for Siege defense, at least in higher ranks. I think in lower ranks it might still be used, especially 4-star. She still probably will be used. But she's, since her nerf, no longer as strong. So I would say just strong in Siege defense, so I give her the specific content one. Then we go on with Ryan. I would say not commonly used, but has some potential to do some damage. Some people have asked me, can I use a Ryan to replace something in a Dragon's team? Wouldn't really recommend it though. But you could, but wouldn't really recommend it. I would say Trevor is kind of the same thing, can be used here and there in, for example, the Rift Dungeons or like an early R5 kind of team, but it's not really that great. And I think that this thing is just straight up bad. I don't even remember exactly what he does, but I checked it yesterday, I forgot already, and that's how bad it was. So I'm just gonna place him here in feed. Then we have Stella, which I think is actually a pretty interesting unit. It can do a lot of damage. It can actually do pretty nice clear up kind of stuff. But the moment that you get like a Tay or something or another heavy damage dealer on water, then this thing is easily replaced. Lexi can have some potential where if the enemy does heal quite a bit, then you can use it actually as like a high hit. But I haven't really seen this being used all too much. I would say lower end siege maybe can do if the enemy is showing a lot of healing, then you could potentially do this. I would say this thing is also like can be a nice hit, but is also pretty easily replaced the moment that you have something else that can do higher damage. Plus, I would say that her sister is a lot better at doing her job because of the elemental thing. That's the main thing. Then we have Lapis. I would say Lapis is definitely a decent unit to build, but the moment that you get some other units, it's just way better. You can use this towards your first Dragon's team. You can use it in like Subjugation, Labyrinth, anything PvE related pretty much. So it's definitely a pretty strong one. But I would say it's also replaced by Net 5 later on. A star is definitely one of those you want to build one of. It's insanely good best in slot for a Necro team. It's really good for R5 team as well. You can even put it towards Dragon, so definitely has a lot of PvE usage, Subjugation, Labyrinth, all of that kind of stuff. Very strong PvE unit right there. Definitely something you want to build early on. Lupinus is definitely something I don't really see being used. I think it does have some potential, but she's not really that great. It does have enemy max HP scaling, but it's not really that great. I think I'm gonna place Emma in the same slot. It does recently get a or did get a buff where she actually does get a shield for overhealing. Could be placed in an early R5 team, but I don't really see this being used all too much. I would say Lisa is pretty good for R5, but it's pretty much just R5 did recently also get a buff to have cooldown decreased if she's not cleansing anything, but I think it's just an early game R5 team, and then at some point you will replace her by a Net 5 later. And this thing, you don't really see too many cleaves these days with Copper Bulldozer kind of style, and she's kind of the setup for that, but for that reason, not really that great. Moving on next to some doggies or cats or whatever those things are. Avarice, I think. Yeah, it's like that anti-revive mechanic, but it doesn't do enough damage where I actually feel like it's good, so I would probably just straight up feed this. Kamoon, however, is pretty good, but it's just good in Siege. You can actually build multiple of it if you want to. It's not really the most meta unit in Siege out there anymore, but I definitely do think it's still a pretty strong Siege unit. But I would say more early game Siege than actually late game Siege, because late game Siege you don't really see too much Kamoons these days. Ayunu, I would say, is... would I say build at least one? I would say build at least one. It's kind of versatile. You can put it in some defenses here and there. It's not too bad. You definitely do use it in some offenses here and there for like a team that just the whole team dies with like a Samath and a Perna or something like that. Or you put it next to a Camilla, it dies, it comes back, and you snipe out a unit. So something like that is definitely nice for Siege offense. I do tend to use it in Arena offense, mainly into server from time to time as well. And I would say in RTA, it could be a specific counter pick into a few things as well. Plus, it's pretty good into the stages of like some of the Labyrinth stage. So I would say that Ayuni is definitely one that you should build, and then you just build one of. Moving on to a Cubesinov. It's currently just used for R5, I guess, so it's not really commonly used, but it has some potential. Domatov, I think it's not really commonly used, but he does have some potential because he does have that Oblivion in his third skill. And it's the Oblivion plus a defense break, so it's not too bad, but it's not really commonly used, but I think he has potential. Then next we have an Immensity. Once again, it's also not really commonly used that much because it's just a setup for Copper Bulldozer, and I feel like a lot of the defenses these days are not really Copper Bulldozerable, so not commonly used, but can have some potential. Then we go for Chilling, and I would say Chilling is definitely OP. I would build at least one. You could build multiple, but I would say for Chilling, kind of depends what you want. But I would say at least build one. Would I build multiple on Chilling? Would I recommend people to straight up build multiple? No, I wouldn't say so. For Chilling, like if you put Chilling on defense, you just kind of need that one, and then you can use that same one for offense as well. But Chilling is absolutely one of those that you want to be building these days. very insanely strong because chilling does give like the 19.5 or 20 speed that he gives per buff. So he does have a passive built in that if you have him on shield and will, that he pretty much gets like what 39 or 40 speed base like extra, which is insane. So he technically has like a 141 base pretty much. And that just makes him insanely fast. And then as a booster, you can also boost up other units to move after him. Keep in mind that if your chilling is super fast, your other units also have to be pretty fast or have speed increasing artifacts. But definitely a very loaded kit for this little guy over there. Then we have Smokey, which I would say no one is really using. So I would just straight up feed that because his brothers are just that good. Because Windy is one of those you do want to build multiple of. Because in Siege, Windy is just insanely OP. Any fire unit out there, there's pretty much not a single fire unit that's not just hard countered by a Windy, which is pretty insane. So if you care somewhat about Siege, this thing is your jam. You can even place it towards RTA, and you can even place it towards arena offense or maybe even arena defense. But it's mainly Siege offense where this thing is insanely good. Then we have this thing, and I think no one uses this thing ever. Right? It does some weird cleanses kind of stuff. No, let's just place it there. Then we have some art mages. Sonnet, I think no one really plays this. Yeah, not commonly used, probably just feed. Harmonia, we do actually see sometimes in Siege defense, sometimes in Siege offense, but I think it's just good for that. Siege defense teams, you sometimes see it with like Vigor and Kinky and that kind of stuff, but I think that those teams are super outdated as well. But you could still use it there, it's not too bad. Triana, I would definitely claim as, I would say current day and age, build at least one. If you care about Siege, you could build multiple, but it's not really one of those that I would say these days it's like super much build multiple. But having one Triana build is always good. I personally don't really use more than one Triana for like ages, but there are some offense hits where you maybe want to build multiple Trianas. It's always just a good unit. And keep in mind with Triana, if you want to put it towards damage, you only need crit rate and speed and crit damage from like skill 1 on artifacts, and you're already doing quite some damage. And we go on with some Dice Mages. Reno, it's not really great, might as well feed. Ludo, I think Ludo has some potential, but yeah, he can be annoying for 4-star Siege kind of stuff. He's kind of annoying, he's not that bad at it, but he's not really great. And I think Morris is kind of the same thing. Like, it's okay-ish for those bruiser fights if you tend to get lucky and roll a lot of double hits and that kind of stuff. Then it could be nice, but it's not super great. And then we go on for some boomerangs. I would say Talia, definitely build one, and it's absolutely recommended to build just one. Very good in Dragonsteel, very good in all of the Rift dungeons, very good in R5. Can be used in Siege offense hits next to a Triana, for example. Just an overall very solid unit. Shaina, I would say, do we actually want to build multiple Shainas in current meta? No, I wouldn't really say so, but Shaina is definitely one of those you want to build as well. It's used in a lot of content. So Shaina for Dragon, still best in slot. For armor breaking in R5, still best in slot. Can use in Siege offense, so Shaina in general is just very good. Then we have Melissa, which I would say is just a decent unit for Rift dungeons, maybe R5, but then it's also pretty easy to replace her, so it's not as great. Sabrina, well, Sabrina goes next to these two. Once again, same thing, very good in all of those PvE dungeons, can be used next to Triana in Siege offense. It's just an overall super solid unit for PvE. Maruna, I would say, is good for TOA and just TOA. I actually want to one down her. I think people don't really use it, but for TOA, she's actually pretty good, but the moment you have more AoE TOA units, it kind of gets replaced pretty easily. Can use it for some of the Labyrinth stages as well. It's not too bad with that in combination with the Shaina. Zenobia, I would say, is pretty good for just Siege offense, Siege defense because of the speed lead, but it's not really crazy good anymore, so it's not really replaced by a 5-star if she's in Siege. Now let's actually place her down as well. So like, she's not really that commonly on defense anymore. And since there's a lot of more speed leads coming in on 4-star with like this thing and that thing and then a few more, she's kind of falling off as well. Then we have Hernie, which is sometimes used in RTA for the Oblivion. The only thing is that she mostly sucks at doing it, so it's not really great. But you could use it for RTA, for Oblivion, or maybe Siege. This thing I've never seen being used. I think it's pretty terrible. Melia is still not that bad for dotting in TOA, but it's also not really crazy good for it. So it's just kind of okay. Skogul goes there as well. I would say Skogul is not super bad for siege defense, but I think these days people do know how to play against Skogul, and it's not doing as much damage anymore, and people destroy HP anyway, so not really that crazy of a unit anymore, but it's still pretty good. We have Abigail. I would say Abigail is at least build 1, and the reason that it's an at least build 1 and she's OP is because she's best in slot for Necro. And the thing is, she's only best in slot in Necro. She's not good anywhere else. But since she is the best in slot in Necro, even if you include like all LD5s and everything, you would still use Abigail. Even though no one really farms Necro that much at the end game, it is still an insane unit that can't really be replaced. So I would definitely use this thing in the Necro team. Then we have Scarlet, which I think does have some... I don't really see it being used, but I do think it has some potential. It does have some... It still has the same S2 as Abigail. And it does have some interesting skills, like on the skill 3 with like some armor break and that kind of stuff. I think it's armor break branding even, which is pretty interesting. So I think that she has some potential. Then we have Covenant. I would definitely say build 1 Covenant. It's a very strong unit for siege offense and also arena offense. One of those insanely strong snipe units to kill something right off the get-go. And I think he is pretty much the strongest in that sense out there for 4-star. So definitely want to build. Carcano is definitely build 1 at least. You could build multiple if you want to put multiple towards siege defense. But it's no longer as common for siege defense lead anymore. But if you want to put more towards siege, you can actually build multiple. But he's definitely a strong one that you want to build at least once. Carbine is definitely one of those that I would say strong in specific content. And then with specific content, I would say it's insanely strong, best in slot for Rift Dungeon, especially against the Wind one. Plus in the boss of Subjugation, it's also absolutely best in slot where this thing just gets so many turns in if you're fighting the water one. So it is very good in specific content. You can maybe place it in R5, or not in R5. Well, R5 maybe. But you can actually place it in RTA against a more kind of comp as well. It's not too bad into that, but it does have a little bit more counters going for him there as well. Then we go for some gargoyles. I think that the water one, I don't really know too much about it, but I don't really seem to be used as well. I would say that this one and Knight. If you do care a lot about siege, you can build multiple of those, but they're just good in siege. So I could maybe place them in an OP, but I think they're just good in siege and nothing else. And personally, I don't really use them because I don't really hit 4-stars, but I definitely can see those two being used on like just tanky teams with like this one with like Delph with Triana, and then you never give the enemy a proper turn and then you just slowly clear them out. Or this thing with, I don't even know what it's used with, but just some tanky bruisering comp in siege is definitely why you use those two for. Then we have this thing which is used sometimes in siege offense as well to block where an Adriana can't give the buffs and therefore an Odin can stack, for example, or it's used in like some TOA stages. Can be used specifically for those. It's kind of strong in that, but yeah, let's just place over there. I think it's pretty unique in that. I would say Hongyong, which is actually the current HOH that we're gonna get, and I definitely would say build one of those. She's insanely strong because she has the unique mechanic that if you give a attack buff plus a boost to a Tiana, if you tune them right, Tiana will get her second turn while still getting an attack buff for that second turn. After that, she actually stripped everyone also on your side later. So you can actually use her plus a Tiana plus a Truffle or something, and then you have double booster. You still get an attack buff, and you still get the Tiana AoE guaranteed strip. So there's a lot of potentials with her to do things which you can't really do otherwise, because otherwise you're looking at the speed of your Tiana being fastest. Your Tiana is like 96, whereas she is 107. So that is an 11 speed extra that you can use for getting your attack buff in while being also pretty fast. Plus, she is pretty nice into Camillas because Camillas will focus her, and then her skill to also or do a little bit like damage on the Camillas as well. So she's absolutely one that you want to build. Very good unit. This thing is, I would say, strong in just TOA hell. Like this thing is the queen of TOA hell, slow clearing it with like Bolvric and heals, and then this thing. But it's just good for TOA hell. Can maybe use it here and there in siege offense hits as well. Then we have Kyle, which is absolutely a very strong unit in Dragons. It's also a very strong unit in Giants. I would also say that in R5 it's maybe a little bit less useful because you will get a hit in, so it's a little bit less interesting. I would say in Siege you can also see it to snipe out a unit here and there, because this thing actually does do a good amount of damage if you just place, for example, next to a Hongyeong, and you boost this thing, it can just do an insane amount of damage and then just clear things right off the get-go. Then we have Thought, which I think is the unit that gives all of the dots that are on your side towards the enemy, but wouldn't really use that. And then this thing is the one with continuous damage hit itself, and that's also not that great. So not really using those two. Then we go for this one, which is the one that has the multi-hit skill 3 that actually absorbs A to B and then afterwards goes for an ignored defense. I think it has some potential, but I don't really see the use case of it too much. This one is the one that has the, I think it's crit buff and speed buff. It's not too bad, but I would say that a Chilling just does her job so much better that she doesn't really get used that much. So can be used, but not really commonly used. And this thing is one of those that's a wannabe Sonya, but then it's a lot worse. This thing is just kind of garbage. I wouldn't really use that. Then we go Suiki, which is very strong. Definitely one that you want to build these days. It's very strong in RTA. Probably one of the 4 stars that can perform best in RTA. Can be used in Siege offense if you have like a longer drawn out fight as well. Arena offense, maybe for inter-server, but that's about it. Defense wouldn't really place this unit, but definitely an interesting one. I would say Kinky or Kaki is also definitely one you still want to be building. It's for arena offense, insane damage, siege offense, insane damage, inter-server defense. If you happen to have like it next to an AoE armor breaker, such as like maybe a Nana, or you happen to have like a Nephthys or something like that, he definitely has quite some potential to have him pretty strong. Suiki, on the other hand, I would say is just siege defense, but it's not really that great at siege defense anymore, but you can still place it on siege defense. Water Robo, I would say you just kind of use it for a revive mechanic in the R5, but has some potential, but is not really used that much. Then we see the Fire one, which is also, yeah, it can counter some things in RTA. If you don't really have strips, you could maybe make it work, but I think he's okay-ish, but it's just that you need good runes on him to actually make him work. And then we have the Wind Robo, which is definitely you want to build one of. It's very OP for Siege, or well, mainly for RTA. Actually, for RTA, it's used a lot. But for Siege, you can actually use it as well. If you want to go, for example, with a Tyrone, a Robo +1, then you do have a strong offense. Sure, it will fail like 10% of the time if you miss your strips, but it's still pretty strong offense that will give you a high win rate if they are runed correctly. Then we have this thing, which actually has like the buff up of accuracy and resistance, but there's still the 15 check that the accuracy and resistance goes through, so it's not really interesting, might as well feed. This thing is just strong in specific content, which is just R5, and in R5 it's pretty strong actually. You can actually use it for arena offense as well, so definitely not a bad unit to build. Celine is okay-ish for, I would say, the subjugation, but I feel like it's not crazy strong as well. That's the one that gives the armor break the moment that your units that just hit are on attack buff, but it doesn't count on multi-hit. So let's say an Antares skill 2, it would get attack buff because of himself, but then he will only give the armor break on his final hit of that S2, so it becomes a little bit less interesting because of that. Then we go on to some cats. With those cats, I have to kind of remember, I think that, which one was it? Well, this one is pretty decent. It is not used as much, but I think it's actually quite decent for some stuff in if you want to hit on Siege with like a Bruiser kind of comp, because he does do a good amount of damage for just being tanky. I would say Nubelung and Beerman, they're less interesting. You don't really see them being used as much at all. I think that, no wait, Water was the one that actually makes you, or this one is the one that if you're slept that you cannot be die, or you can die on sleep. This one, to be honest, I don't even remember. But if you were that bad that I don't even remember, you're probably not that great. Could be wrong on that, but I'm just gonna place him over there. Then we have some of those cookies, which I would say are just good in subjugation. And yeah, I would say they're actually, I started using this one together with this one plus the light one in subjugation with a Rogue and a Graswald. I'm clearing all subjugation waves with those, like exactly 5 units. But I'm also doing the elaborate time attack right now, and I'm getting like wave 19 with exactly the same team as well. So I want to give those 2 strong and specific content, which is just subjugation, but they're actually like very legit at those content things as well. So it's pretty good for that. Then we have this thing. I would definitely build one. It's definitely good for one of those sniping comps if you want to, for example, snipe with a Bethany, or if you want to snipe with a Covenant, or maybe even with this thing. It's definitely a very nice setup for snipers to just be fast and then boost stuff up and then just kill with that. Absolutely strong unit. Then we have this thing, which is kind of weird, where it does extra damage if a unit is already frozen. So it's nice paired with like a Red or a Tyrone or something like that. Big issue, however, is you get very mono element. So for that reason, I feel like it has potential, but it's often replaced by something with like a Red or some shit. This thing has some potential for Steel Fortress, but it's actually kind of bad as well. It doesn't really do its job that well. And this thing pretty much does nothing in the first place. Don't even remember it exactly. Same for this one. Doesn't really do much as far as I remember. This thing is just straight up bad because it was the one that was supposed to replace the Tattoo, and my juice started later in the game. It's like, who the hell is a Tattoo? Well, that's a unit we used to use before for exploding dots. This thing can explode dots, but the animation was so slow that, yeah, it just didn't work out. It was just straight up terrible. So, yeah, straight up bad. This thing, I think, has some potential. It's just the bad part about her. She has that skill 3, which does always crit on her wrong element. So she does always crit on wind, with also landing a branding at the moment. However, she doesn't have perfect AI to actually use that as well. So I do think she has some potential. Her S2 is that armor break, which doesn't really want to armor break because of low rates, but I think she has potential, but she's not really that great. Ezio is also one of those, has potential, but it's not really that great. I always try to put him towards Giants because he can lower the cooltime of units, so making a 4-turn cooltime unit to a 3-turn, and therefore you can use skills in the mid-boss and the final boss. However, since Luna has the buff itself right now that she can just do it by herself, this thing kind of gets useless, so you don't really see too much. This Bayek thing has enemy max HP scaling, but he doesn't do any fucking damage. This thing you also don't see too much. I think it's the one that actually gets extra attack power for being long in the fight, or there was something about his attack power or some shit, but he's not really that great. I think that this one is also like, both of them, they can be used in maybe some bruiser hits on siege or that kind of stuff, but it's not really that crazy. I would say that this one is a little bit more interesting because this one on siege defense, it has a lot of multi-hits, it does have a lot of absorbs. If you put this towards high additional damage artifacts plus despair, it can actually be a pretty nasty unit. So I would say that this one, because of siege defense and maybe siege offense, I put him strong in specific content. Then this one we also put in strong for specific content, and the specific content is fighting against Claris, because every time that she is stunned, she will kind of still do her skills, which is actually pretty strong against Clara teams in net force. This thing I've never seen being used. I don't actually remember what she does, so I'm just gonna put her over there. This one I do have seen being used here and there. It's not really that great, but you can see it being nice for... She kind of has the same thing as Soha, which she can strip and then also boost, but she's also speed lead of 19. So it's kind of budget on everything, but it's actually not that bad. So I think she's pretty strong in specific content. Then we have this thing, which I think is just good for damage in R5, maybe in Dragons, maybe in a whole bunch of places, but it's also pretty easy to replace her. I think in Siege offense, she has a lot of damage as well, but it's just not really that great. Then we have this Jennifer thing, which is the one that actually gives the shield and that kind of stuff. I think it's straight up bad. This thing is the one that gives the dots and actually has pretty decent dots for like TOA or maybe even the dot team. Dot team is kind of the issue that you can't use it against Camillas, but I think she's pretty decent. And then this thing also somewhat has the dots, where I would say it's quite a bit less interesting. So yeah, that is the whole list. I will also be sharing the list in the YouTube video as well. I'm not going to be posting this one on Reddit. But I think that it kind of makes sense and speaks for itself right now with the tiers that we have. I also will be doing the same thing for LDs tomorrow. So if you appreciate those kind of videos, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and definitely check out the video of tomorrow with the LNDs as well, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab, which has the dungeon guide archive and the video guide archive, which contains all of the guides that you need. Hope to see you there.